All right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this edition of the MSP Success webinar series. Pretty cool of something of new for 2025 is that Datto is back here. We got the Datto brand here with this presentation today, with this webinar today, and talking backup, which, Frank, we haven't talked backup in forever, it seems like. There's been like cybersecurity and AI and everything else. It's really, rewinding back a few years here. And if you look at my backdrop over here, I don't know if you can see it in here, but I've got the data from a few years ago here in my backdrop from boot camp, I think 3 years back. That we had TMT boot camp. And so, really excited about this. And on this call today, we've got Frank DeBenedetto. Frank is a longtime TMT member. He just recently sold his MSP about a year ago. And he is the CEO and founder of Audit as well, that many of you probably know. And then Frank, I don't even know what your exact title is there at Kaseya these days. With it, but I'll let you introduce yourself here in a minute. Frank and I have known each other for close to 15 years, and I think in all of this, when you look at it from his MSP, is that he knows how to really from a value-based selling, and that's a lot of what Audit was all about in creating that tool, is how do you put together a presentation, a sales presentation, a sales talk track to be able to sell the things that maybe sometimes everyone doesn't think that they need, but being able to present to them so that they know exactly what you're talking about and why they need it, why they need that medicine that they don't want to take there, and why it's so critical to their business. And so we're going to have a lot of these value-based selling hacks, tricks, strategies that we're going to talk about today here around backup and disaster recovery. One thing just from a promotion that I want to talk about here first, before we get it turned over to Frank, we do have the IT Sales and Marketing Bootcamp coming up in late April in Dallas, Texas. This is, I believe it's the 17th or 18th IT Sales and Marketing Bootcamp with Technology Marketing Toolkit. I saw it just this morning. We are 70% full, or sorry, 75% full, and it is filling up fast. But if you head over to robinsbigseminar.com, the early bird, the extreme early bird discounts are expiring tomorrow. And so make sure that you get signed up for that event of being there in person. If you're looking to grow your business, look at how do I sell more in my business, that is the exact place to be. Also, if you're looking for AI strategies on how do I get more done using AI in my business, whether it's on the tech side, the marketing side, the sales side, we're going to have a ton of tracks around that. And so I'll drop that in the chat as Frank is talking, but make sure that you head over there, check that out. If you are a TMT member, make sure that you get signed up. And thank you, Tanya, for putting that in the chat there. If you're a TMT member and you haven't gotten signed up, make sure that you get that before all the seats are full. So with that, Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to talk about here today and everything that you can share based on your great success as an MSP.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate the gracious intro. I almost don't want to ruin it with a presentation now, but I appreciate the kind words as always. Also want to introduce Jason Price here too. Long-time Datto employee. I think you said 11 years, right, Jason? So you're almost one of the original guys over there, I think.
I'm OG at this point. Yes, 11 years in.
Awesome. I know I've learned a lot of good stuff from you here. So all the good things that I say are likely sourced from Jason. I'm just here to deliver. So, Jeff, you touched on something that I wanted to start with, and it plays off the theme of back to BCDR. And you and I are old enough to remember some of the vendor hallways at the early boot camps that Robin would put on with TMT. And there was always a theme down the hallway. And I remember RMM was certainly a theme at one point, and everybody would bounce between the big 3 or 4 companies, and we'd hop around, and that was a big one in the early days, patching and remote control. And then we were probably doing tape backup back then, suffering through the misery of it all. And magically, all of a sudden, I think we called it BDR back then. And somehow we've inserted the C for continuity, but I think it's more appropriate. So BCDR, and I remember every other booth was backup and disaster recovery. It's all people could talk about. We were hopping around between another 4 or 5 vendors, and that was super hot. I remember cloud came and went really quick. I think because people were scared of it. MSPs thought like cloud's going to put us out of business, so if we ignore it. Back then, it was like 10 years ago. Like we'll pretend it doesn't exist. And then cybersecurity came, like you said, and now a little bit of AI, and that is the dominant force. But the funny part is that we've never stopped backing up. Like it's not like that was old school stuff. Like we don't really do that anymore. So I think it's really topical. I'll get into it later, but I can tell you 100% of my customers, and probably yours when you had your MSP, bought backup, right? Like they might not have bought EDR and MDR and all these other fancy alphabet soup terms that we have these days, because maybe either the customer didn't see the value, or we were unable to sell that value to them. But nobody ever told me no on backup. So I want to get back almost to the basics, hence the term back to BCDR. So Jeff had already kind of given me a little bit of an intro here. My title, Executive Vice President of Business Development over here at Kaseya. That's just a fancy way of saying I've got a lot of businesses under my belt. So as Jeff mentioned, a former MSP, Two River Tech, sold that about 18 months ago. I had created Audit and sold that to Kaseya around 4 years ago, which brought me here. Helped build 2 other businesses, Secure Payments and an M&A Concierge Program for MSPs. And then today, I've gotten back involved with backup, with Datto, and the myriad variations of backup that we have now underneath that umbrella. So that's kind of a little bit of my experience. So a little bit of agenda today. I want to go through a little bit of a history lesson, just talk about backup, just to make sure we can level set, what's out there and where the real value comes in. I want to talk about the data. A lot's changed over 10 years, right, Jason? It's good old days. Used to back up a server in an office. Now we've got data all over the place. So if we follow the data, we follow the money, right? Because everything here is an opportunity to protect the customer, but we also monetize that as an MSP. So it's an opportunity to make money. And then the last thing, of course, I want to talk about the newly minted Backup Concierge Program from Kaseya. So with that, we'll get started. So I always like to start out with a question. And Jason, since you're off mic, I'll ask you, and that is, what's the one solution every customer buys, right? And I already had alluded to it.
Backup.
Absolutely. So again, when I had my MSP, backup was always the easiest product to sell, because since the dawn of time, since data has been stored digitally on whatever medium, everybody has always harped on, you have to back it up, backup, right? Everyone's lost something at some point, learned the lesson the hard way, hopefully not too catastrophically, but this was always the easiest thing to sell. And so in my MSP, like 100% of those customers used it. These days, I think it's hammered home even more, just because of all the cybersecurity threats. Back in the day, it was like, hey, if hardware fails, or maybe somebody deletes something by accident, you could recover. These days, cybersecurity, we know, drives a lot of it. So the fear, we see over 350% increase in ransomware attacks since 2020. So, and that's on the rise, and it's all exacerbated. Fortunately for us, we get free marketing by the media, right? Because every time ransomware hits some big, business or some segment of the market, it becomes a headline on the news and people hear about it, right? So we don't have to convince people, hey, we should back up. They get it right out of the gate. However, I would argue, is it really backup that people are buying from you, that your customers are buying, right? And I say no, because what it really is the recovery aspect. You see, we back up multiple times a day. If you back up your customer every hour, doesn't really care about the recovery, the backup, does he? He cares about that one day, might be months or years from now, that you need to recover something. And that's where the value of this solution comes in, right? And what they're paying for isn't the backup. They're paying you because they want it to look like it never happened, right? I would also use the term restoration, right? We want it to be restored. So think of it like car insurance. Everybody here has a car. Everybody has car insurance. Obviously, they make you buy it, so we have it. But you're not just buying the insurance to check the box to have the insurance, right? And fortunately, I haven't been in too many fender benders, so I haven't really used the insurance very much. But what I know is that the few times that I've needed it, it's been there for me. And what we're really looking for is the ability to restore back to a point in time like it never happened, right? And we have to have the confidence. And one thing that Datto has for sure is every partner that I talk to has said they have 100% confidence in their ability to recover if it was a Datto solution, right? So no one ever apologizes for selling a Datto backup. It may not be the cheapest backup out there, but they always have confidence that it'll be there when they need it. Here's the challenge, and Jeff alluded to this as well, is we as MSPs, and I still identify as an MSP, I should probably start saying like former or whatever, but we need to sell that to the end customer, right? So I knew when I had my MSP what I thought was good and where the value was, but sometimes they would say, hey, isn't there anything that's less expensive, right? So we need to find the balance between price and value without confusing the customer. And that's where the challenge comes in, because I think to really do this properly, we've got to start talking about things like RTO and RPO, right? Jason, so you probably specialized in this a little bit, but you start to say these terms and now you have to define those, right? If you confuse the customer, what I found is that you force them to default and buy based on price. So we've got to kind of, figure out a way to simplify it. But as soon as we go down that path, it starts to look like this to your customer, right? Because we start throwing all these terms around, right? Differential, bare metal, replication, image based. And this gets, us techies excited. It scares and bores the non-technical customers that we have. And again, they look at the price and they try to make a decision based on that. So I'm going to get a little techie here. I have to, right? I know the audience probably will be able to follow along. So two big drivers in backup that I think has been forgotten about is RTO and RPO. So let's start with RTO, return recovery time objective, right? Quite simply states, hey, what's the maximum length of time that the system could be down following a failure? So sometimes customers would say, hey, I could afford to be down an hour. I could be down 1 day. I could be down a week. As you can imagine, those answers drive the cost of the solution, right? If you have to be back up in an hour, it would stand to reason that we need a more robust and reliable system that one that would need to be up in a week, right? Because we have plenty of time then to kind of, go find the data and pull it back down. So super important. That's number one. Number two is recovery point objective. This says, hey, what's the maximum amount of data that we could lose that's acceptable? So, oftentimes in the good old days, I remember we'd back up once a day, like at midnight or something. But what happens if the server crashed at 4 p.m.? That meant you lost everything from midnight to 4 p.m. Now, some businesses might say, yeah, that's acceptable, that's fine. But what I learned over time was that more and more businesses said that's absolutely not fine. I can't afford to lose an entire day's worth of work. If we have, 50 employees, that's a ton of man hours, right? And especially if you're working in like a database or QuickBooks or something like that. So these two components are super, super important. To kind of simplify this, we've got a little bit of a graphic here, right? So if we look in the middle, it says, hey, disaster strikes. To the right, quite simply, that RTO, that line just represents time. How much time is acceptable before we resume normal operation? To the left, that says how far back are we going to need to revert to, right? And that line, you know, bigger or smaller is going to dictate what the amount of data that's acceptable. If we get into RPO a little bit greater, this should show it here. So you see disaster strikes, the unrecoverable portion, that's what you lose from the last backup point, right? So these concepts are important. I want to tie this together to something else because I know we talk backup and we say, hey, that if all else fails, backup is your last line of defense. I'm going to argue with you and say it's actually not. These days, it's the cyber liability insurance policy. So I think probably 90+% of all MSP's customers now have some form of cyber liability insurance, recognizing the threats that exist today, much, much greater than they were, say, 10 to 15 years ago. And every single cyber liability insurance application has a question like this, right? So in this case, it says, hey, if the secondary / backup system is in place, how long before the system is operational? That's RTO. So they made it like really, really simple in this application to fill out that answer. And many times the MSP, along with their customer, they fill this out together, right? So what do? We check off the box. Yeah, of course we have backup. I don't know, 1 day. Sounds pretty good, right, Jason? I mean, you know, if you put 7 days, your customer might say, wait a minute, you know, I'm gonna be down for 7 days. Good, take like a day.
Yeah.
And let's face it, we don't use backup all that often. Like in my MSP, I could probably count the times on one hand how many times we actually went into like a disaster recovery mode. But again, the backup is a form of insurance. This is that last line. Now, what do you think would happen if a claim is filed on this policy and the backup that you actually sold that was cheaper took 7 days for them to be back up and running? And they filed a claim and said, hey, we were down for 7 days. You know, it's $100,000 a day we lost. We have a claim for $700,000. You think the insurance carrier is going to look to see what you wrote here? And they say, you said you're going to be back up in 1 day. That's what we underwrote. You know, you said you could be back up in 1. It took you 7. That means that whatever backup you sold didn't match your answer here. So this is critically important because there is a chance that if your customer goes to file a claim for whatever reason and this doesn't match the backup system that you sold, that claim could get denied or reduced. And that could be catastrophic because we know that sometimes, even though we have a backup of data, the bad guys in a ransomware attack threaten to expose that data on some website, which means you have to pay the ransom to keep the data private. So critically important, something that you could use to, you know, again, when you're selling to your customers and they say, why is this backup more expensive than something else? Say, well, the value is that I'll have you up and running in 1 day versus 3 days or 5 days or a week, right? So something to pay attention to. Here at Kaseya, we have over 50,000 MSP partners. And what I did was I just went into our system here and I wanted to take a look at some of the deals that were won. And it was funny that almost every time I saw the word recovery, and I highlighted it here, these are actual comments from partners, MSP partners that bought that Datto backup solutions. And almost every single time the customers would say things like, oh yeah, you know, our customer wanted a peace of mind that recovery would be there, or they stressed the importance of the reliability of that recovery. And Datto has been known for that for years. Right? So let's kind of continue along. I alluded to the fact that I'm old enough to remember back when we used to use tape backups, and you know, we put a tape in, we would back up, and the next day you would give the tape to someone in the office, and you know, he or she would take that tape off site, and that was like how you rotated and made sure if the place burned down or someone stole everything, at least you had an off-site copy. They also had services you could pay, and people would show up and they'd put it in the vault. And, you know, it seems archaic looking back, but all the data was on site, on-prem, in an office, right? You know, sometimes they had multiple offices, but you know, there's always data on some server somewhere. So at least that's, you know, back in the good old days. And so magically, somebody, I don't know who we give the credit to who created the first BCDR, But somebody said, hey, forget about this tape thing. Why don't we just back up to disk, right? So we'll put an appliance, a little server on site, and you can back up the data to that. It'd be fast because it'll go across the network, so no more tapes. And then we could send that data off-site, so if you had like a T1 line back in the day, it'd replicate the data. And the cool part was you're just replicating and sending any data that changed, right? So you weren't doing full backups every night. So it became a very, very efficient way to back up. The reality was is that the customer still just paying you for recovery. What this did was it made it easier for MSPs to deliver that recovery and that service in a more reliable way. So there was a price tag for that, right? Suddenly it's a little bit more expensive than maybe what tape backup was, but greater reliability, and there's value here. And this is why people paid hundreds of dollars per month for BCDR appliances, right? After that, we started to see now a change. So what happens today? We see data going where? SharePoint OneDrive, right? So the server, the file server that was on site that we used to back up with an on-prem appliance, now we're seeing a shift to serverless, or someone actually said to me domainless the other day, so that's a new term. We're seeing that data now move up to SharePoint OneDrive, so we don't need to back it up on a local server anymore. We're also seeing data move to Office 365 Google Workspace. So, this probably happened first. I know I've been using Exchange Online for probably a decade now, but, the good old Exchange server, we used to have to back up that on site. Where is it now? There is no server. Why? Because it's service in the cloud, typically with Microsoft or with Google. So that data is moved over there. Azure. So now we're seeing other work streams that were local, like servers, things like SQL Server, or in some case, just an application server that maybe was just forklifted. So instead of having it on a physical server in-house, it's been moved up to their cloud in a more reliable, robust fashion where it's virtualized, easier to maintain, easier to scale. So we're seeing work streams move there. And then lastly, we've seen a lot of line of business apps turn into SaaS apps. So like QuickBooks is a good example of that, but almost every industry has its own verticalized software. And remember in the healthcare industry, they used to have, some old software that would run on a server. And now most of those EMR type products are all web-based, right? So they just need, a tablet or something that gets out to the internet. There are no servers. So we see a dramatic shift for that data up to the cloud. It's not everything. I know that some industries still have servers on-prem for sure, but this is the direction that data is going. And then lastly, which has existed since the dawn of time, people have work remotely, right? So laptops, we see that more now in a hybrid environment, certainly accelerated since COVID, but there's always somebody who has some, device with a hard drive in it that potentially stores some data outside of the office. So we know data is all over. There's data sprawl, and budgets are tighter than ever before. What we find too is that MSPs a lot of times will end up with a multitude of backup vendors because the data moves all over and they don't view their current provider maybe as adequate to back up maybe where the data has gone. So they use one vendor for BCDR, but they don't like that vendor for their Office 365 backup. So they have another vendor. And this is unique because, Jeff, you probably remember the good old days. You had RMM. You used that same RMM on all of your machines, all your endpoints. You didn't use 3 RMMs, right? And use different ones on different machines because that would be very inefficient. You'd have different ways to patch. You'd have different ways to remotely control. However, we see that. We don't do that with EDR. You don't do that with MDR typically. But we see it with backup where, we find that about that a typical MSP has 3.8 different vendors in there just to do backup for their customers. So I'm here to tell you that Datto can back up everything, right? So it doesn't matter where the data lives. If it happens to be on-prem still, we have appliance-based backup in our flagship Cirrus line of appliances and Alto for slightly lower end. We have the ability to do cloud replication, of course, and disaster recovery up in the cloud. We have direct-to-cloud backup in the form of what we call endpoint backup. So if you want to back up straight to the cloud, you can. You want to bypass an appliance, you want to back up things like workstations, which we're going to get into in a second, we have backup there. We have SaaS Protect, and that allows you to back up your Office 365 mailboxes or G Suite mailboxes. So we have the ability to back that up. We have Azure Backup. So if you move your workloads up to Azure, we can grab it there. And soon you're going to start seeing from Datto the ability to back up verticalized line of business applications. So things like QuickBooks Online, Salesforce, etc. down the line. It's well known that it's not a great practice to allow your vendor that hosts your live data to also back up your data, because there's typically no separation there. If someone gets a hold of an admin account, not only can they get the live data, but they can compromise the backup as well. With Flex Spend, and this was introduced about a little over a year ago, you could reassign your customer spend wherever you want. So if you have on-prem backup and you still have a year and a half left on that appliance and you want to move them to Azure, you're not stuck with that appliance. We'll let you flexibly spend, take the spend from the appliance, let that go away, and shift that spend over to our Azure backup. So you're not stuck anywhere along the line. So you can continue to use Kaseya Datto solutions no matter where the data goes, without having to be stuck into contracts or worry about timelines. And our goal is to be flexible here. So we've been listening. In addition to Flex Spend, we also have month-to-month options. So we heard loud and clear that not everybody wants a 1 year or a 3-year agreement, right? So we do have month-to-month. 1 year and 3-year agreements come with a price lock guarantee, meaning that the price won't go up. So in some cases, it's appropriate for an MSP because they want to lock in their costs that they can then pass along to their customers. But in other cases, a good use case is sometimes you acquire a new customer and you want to back them up for, say, 8 months because you have plans to move them to SharePoint OneDrive, after which time you won't need the appliance. So you don't want a 1 year or a 3-year deal because you'll be stuck with that hardware after that you've migrated them. So with month to month, we make it easy. In addition, I brought back free hardware. So right now we have free hardware on the 2 lower end Cirrus lines, the S5X and the S5X4. It's the 2 and the 4 terabyte model. But this is perfect to be able to, you can get it on a month-to-month agreement. You can use it to back up immediately. You don't pay anything for the hardware. And you can cancel it at any time. No questions asked. All you have to do is send the hardware back. Right? So you send the hardware back, contract gets terminated, and there's no risk to you. So if you're not aware of that, make sure you ask your account manager here at Kaseya how you can see pricing and take advantage of that. This has been hugely successful. We announced this at DattoCon in October in Miami, and you're probably going to see some of this cascade up to our other appliances as well, because it's been such a hit. So again, we're here to be the easiest backup vendor that you could work with on the planet. All right. Coming soon, I'm announcing that endpoint backup is also going to get a local cache appliance. So different than a BCDR, this is a little bit more of a lower end appliance like an Alto. It allows us to more quickly restore to an endpoint. So it comes at a lower cost than full-blown BCDR, but it helps maintain the recoverability for those of your customers that want to maintain a good recovery time objective that we talked about. So this will be coming soon. All right. So I'm going to give you a backup pro tip. So one of the things I used to talk about a lot at Two River Tech, my old MSP, is that I became a little bit of a wizard in figuring out how to get my customers to pay me money to more easily deliver our service that ultimately results in better protection to them, right? It's a triple win. So think about it. I get paid by my customer and they happily pay me, right? I get to do a better job for them and I get to deliver my service more easily. So triple win, how do I do it? All right. So as it pertains to this, number one, deploy Kaseya 365 endpoint backup to all of your customers, right? I'll show you some things here on the economics of this. So first of all, let's remember that endpoint includes workstations and laptops, not just the server, right? So for most of our MSPs, those make up the majority, workstation and laptops make up the majority of your base. So I think before I sold my MSP, we probably had 3,000 endpoints, and probably only 30 of those were servers at the time, right? So the majority were endpoints, right? So if I wasn't backing them up, I was missing out on a grand opportunity. Basically, the endpoint backup license is free inside of our Kaseya 365 Endpoint Express SKU. That SKU, it's $2.25 is the retail cost. Not only do you get backup, but you get RMM, you get antivirus, you get ransomware detection, you get third-party patching, and you get EDR for a ridiculously low price of $2.25. I can't remember what I was paying for that stack. I think it was somewhere around $8 though, when I added up all the individual vendors. So when I switched over to this, not only did I drive my cost way down, right, which puts dollars directly into my pocket. So here's a cool thing about cost reduction. It's different than revenue. Revenue, best in class margins, maybe every dollar you're going to put 20 to 25 cents in your pocket. Expense reduction, every dollar you save is a dollar in your pocket, right? So it's a pretty cool exercise to take a look at. So if you have Kaseya 365 already, whether it's the Express or the Professional SKU, you already have endpoint backup. If you don't, for $2.25, you're going to get not only the backup, but all this other stuff here. So economically makes a ton of sense. We include 5 terabytes free of storage. It's perfect for proof of concept, which means not only do you have the licenses now to deploy to every endpoint, but you've got 5 terabytes. You can use that to do a demo for your customer, a proof of concept, show them like what it looks like if you back up a few. And you can do that. It costs you nothing because the first 5 terabytes are free. After that, we only charge $14 per terabyte. And that is way less than what you're going to see out there from other backup vendors. So what I was able to do was to convince my customers to back up those workstations. Now, I know what you're going to say is, are you sure? Like, we don't really need to back up the workstation. So let's talk about risk here, all right? So I think at the bottom of this risk ladder is, hey, everybody, despite what you tell them, hey, save the files in OneDrive or put them in this drive letter, it's backed up. Somebody inevitably stores something on the local machine, right? So you'll have files on the laptop or somewhere on the C drive, or the desktop's pretty popular. I know many times a month we'd get some call from somebody saying, hey, did you back up my laptop? And if you say no, it means they lost that data, right? So that's like minimal risk. I mean, someone's going to be a little bit upset, but they kind of get it. Yeah, you told me. I just didn't listen to what you told me. Not hardware failure, right? Something we really couldn't control as an MSP. If hardware fails, you got to rebuild a laptop for somebody, and that takes time. It's always debatable. I mean, typically we would charge the customer, but it always felt like we were taking advantage of them when they were down. Like, hey, it's like an act of God. The hard drive crashed, so sorry, we have to charge you $300 to rebuild the workstation. And all that work is just to get them back to where they were before, right? So again, without a backup, you don't have the ability, say, to quickly do that, right? It takes a longer period of time. What about a bad patch from Microsoft? More than one time in my career where Microsoft made a mistake over the years, and you end up with blue screen, not on one machine, but on a multitude of machines, right? So now you have, a whole bunch of computers maybe that were patched that you now have to address without the ability to roll back to a previous point in time. That could be a lot of time. And here's the big one, ransomware, right? So I spent a bunch of time thinking about this a couple of years back when there was a supply chain breach in the industry. And while it didn't affect my MSP, I thought about what would have happened if my 3,000 endpoints all got hit at once, right? Where would I start to recover those machines, right? And you might say, well, all you have to do is, use Intune and do all this. Okay, but you still have to start with one machine and you have to end with the 3,000th machine. And I don't think any MSP has the surge capacity to rebuild all of their customers' endpoints simultaneously or within a reasonable amount of time without some sort of backup or way to roll back. And then most recently, remember CrowdStrike? So I wasn't traveling that day. I'm not sure, Jason, if you were, but I know a lot of people are stuck in airports, looking at the blue screens, right, of whatever happened. That CrowdStrike broke all that stuff. Were you stuck?
I was stuck. I don't remember where I was stuck, but it took me about an additional 2 days to get home.
Yeah. So it wasn't quick for, for
At all.
the tech guys to revert backwards, right? And whatever they had to do on one machine, you had to do on thousands of machines. So it's quite a bit of surge capacity. So there is a very, very good compelling argument as to why you should back up. So what I did was I went to my customers and said, hey, we don't back up the endpoint because there shouldn't be any data on it. I get it. We've had your data in the cloud for a long time. However, there is a risk. It's greater than zero that exists from a multitude of things that could take out your endpoints. And if they were taken out, I'm telling you right now that it would take a significant amount of our time to get you back up and running. And that's just to get you to a baseline. We gain nothing other than just restore you back to where you are, unless you have backup. And I gave them a choice. You can either back it up or you can decide not to back it up. And one of the things that I learned from Robin Robbins was this little old risk acceptance form, right? Everybody calls it something different, denial of service or declination of service form. And for those customers who said to me, hey, I don't want to back it up, I said, no problem. I'm going to send you over a little risk acceptance form where you sign off and you acknowledge that I told you you should back up the workstation and you decided not to. And the risk is that it could take hours, days, or weeks for us to get fully back up and running should any one of these, events happen. And each one, carries a different level of catastrophic consequence. The goal, of course, is not to get a whole bunch of risk acceptance forms filled out. The goal is for them to realize the mistake that they're about to make and say, you know what, fine, let's back up those endpoints. And it's only a couple dollars per month per endpoint. It's not a ton of money, but I could tell you I added a lot of revenue on a monthly basis to my MSP pretty quickly. I remember when I did this, I think out of the 3,000, about 1,200 said back it up. They didn't even question me, right? Because I had a pretty tight relationship and they trusted me, right? I think my net was about $3. That's what, how I priced it, where I made about $3. So overnight, that was over $3,600 a month of pure income right in my pocket. Then I started with the risk acceptance forms, and I probably captured another 700 or 800 because people decided I'm not going to sign this, so count me in. And some people did sign it. That's fine. They valued the risk and decided to move on. And then others, over time, I would upsell them. I would meet in a business review. And if you know me from the audit days, I used to sell green boxes. Someone would say, what's this red box? And I'd say, oh, this is endpoint backup. You're not backing up your endpoints. They'd say, tell me about that again. And I would have the conversation. And eventually they'd say, all right, fine, let's add that. It's only an extra $80 a month or $100 a month or something. So I became pretty good. So this is a really cool way to monetize backup for you at the endpoint. Backup everything, right? And what'll happen, you'll have an easier ability to recover your customers' endpoints, no matter what should happen. You don't have to tell them, sorry, we didn't back up your laptop and the files that are on your desktop are now lost or whatever. So again, this is something that worked tremendously well for me. And then last but not least, the Backup Concierge Program. So the word concierge, here's how I look at this, right? In the good old days of when you stay at a nice hotel, they had the front desk, and the front desk is like where you'd call if you like locked your key in the room, or the toilet's clogged or the sink doesn't work. But if you wanted tickets to go see the Predators play in Nashville or something, you used to call the concierge, right? There's always somebody at a separate desk. You didn't call that guy to fix your toilet. You called them when you wanted some higher level of service that usually had a higher level of cost associated with it. So that's what this is. This doesn't cost anything, but it is a more hand-holding opportunity. So the Backup Concierge Program, right, is a higher level, a higher focus on just backup, right? These are individual people in addition to an account manager, right, who will ride along with you that will help with backup, right? We already know last line of defense, super important. It also represents some of the highest risk for an MSP, right? Because if you do it wrong, technically, right, you risk, disaster for your customers. If you do it wrong commercially, you don't really make enough money, right? You don't package or price it properly, and it becomes difficult for you to run your MSP and deliver the services that you promised, right? We find that only about 2/3 of MSPs sell proper backup solutions too. So again, the whole RPO, RTO conversation, if you're selling just cheap backup and just checking that box across the line and not having those deeper conversations with your customers, it should cause you to think twice. So this program here, we have resources to help, right? So these are people that you can lean into. Kaseya has made an investment. It's going to take us probably till the end of 2025 to fully staff this. We started, the initial team is built, Jason, to make you happy. It's all legacy Datto reps, right? These are your boys, right? And girls, right? The ones that have been there for over a decade. They know this stuff well. It's all they sold for years and years and years. They bleed Datto blue, right? So this is the
Absolutely.
initial team. We're going to be moving more over as we continue to evolve the program. Eventually, every single partner of Kaseya's will have a Datto backup concierge assigned to them. It's part of the family. So you have an account manager. You'll have a manager of the account manager. You'll also have a backup concierge, right? So this is someone who's highly focused just on backup, right? Our goals are simple, right? We want to make sure that every one of our partners is aligned on our backup platform, right? Kaseya 365, tremendous platform. You're going to start to see some of the advantages to having all of your backup on here. I can't reveal what's coming down the line, but it's going to be epic. We want to make sure that they're using the proper backups. So again, if you have, needs to have rapid recovery, you need to make sure you have certain solutions in place. If you just want cheap backup, we have that too, and you can dial it up or down. And then we want to help you make the sale, or we want to help you just package it up and make sure you're pricing it correctly. So we've got the experience and the resources to be able to help. So you can rely on this. If you're in a competitive situation, perhaps maybe someone else is trying to sell backup to your customer from a different vendor, we can come in there and help you compete with them as well. So with that said, you guys told me I had about 45 minutes. It's 2:43. It leaves 2 minutes for questions. Of course, I could stay longer, Jeff, but I try to make sure we got in and out on time. So back to you.
Yeah, so John is asking a question here. What does tabletop recovery look like with K365 backup? Any way to simplify the process?
Tabletop. I'm unsure what tabletop refers to. Jason, you know what that means?
No, I'm Googling it right now.
So
Yeah.
John, maybe if you want to.
Yeah, John, if you can clarify, I'd love to answer it. I want to
clarify
make sure I
that.
answer it accurately.
Yeah. Jason, do we have any questions in here that you think would be good of making sure that we have posed to Frank as well? I know you've been typing like crazy.
Yeah, no, well, there was one question just about experience that somebody had with endpoint backup. And I know that there was like the version 1, and now we're at version 2, which alleviated a lot of the things that we were seeing that people were having inconsistent experiences with. So in version 2, it's been really solid. So I did answer David within the chat, and we're going to talk offline to get more details about his deployment of the solution and see where we can go from there. I did also, I've been at Datto once again 11 years. I came in support, so I came in. I was the one. Some of you guys may have been yelling at about 11 years. I'm looking through the list to see if I have any trauma or not, but all you guys look good in here. But we've always had like a whole bunch of different tools, right? So as Frank talked about the RTO and RPO calculator, or RTO and RPO, it just jogged my memory. I'm like, wow, we have RTO RPO calculator that a ton of our partners have used, right? And they've actually put the code into their websites, and they're able to show their clients like, hey, this is what the total cost to your business can potentially be if you don't have, a good solution that's giving you the best RTO and RPO. We also, I put a video in where one of our partners, Dave Pence, he was on a panel and he started talking about what he does in terms of really being able to break down, this big, audacious cost for a backup solution for his clients, right? And how he can take this solution that, over the course of a year could be a $45,000 investment, and he could break it down to the penny and compare how that penny is saving a certain amount of revenue per hour, right? And it was like really, really like compelling. And so what we did a couple of years ago is we said, hey, I wonder if we can take that and put that into a calculator as well. And so I added that link as well, where you can actually go in and put like the total cost of like the system that you're trying to implement, look at the revenue, and actually have a conversation about how that this system, though it looks like a big cost, it's only going to be a penny, which is going to protect, $1,000 per hour of revenue. So I thought those were like pretty cool things that I just remembered and threw in there, and it's been, very valuable. And we've probably gotten away from talking about it, but it's just like really awesome tools that we have for you guys.
Very cool. Hey, I just launched a quick poll on here just to get your input on this. Frank likes affirmations, so if you liked his presentation, then make sure that you request more information here. Frank, let's see, we did get a clarification from John. He says at least once a year we do a mock disaster to test to make sure we know how long it'll take to recover. So that was the clarification on the question he had before.
So I can tell you that there's going to be a release pretty soon of the ability to follow like a run book where you can script out the entire recovery process and then run through that. So that way you could show that the resources are spinning up in the cloud, there's connectivity, and then you could use the reporting to validate potentially to compliance reporting bodies that you're able to do that. So that's something that's been requested, and we've got a big show in Las Vegas, and we like to announce things at big shows. So I would say that end of April is going to be an exciting time for some backup announcements.
Hey, I'll note on this as well here, just because it's in the chat, but for anyone that's watching on the recording here, I know there was a lot of requests to be able to see that risk acceptance form. So Jason had posted it up in here. If you email to jprice, PRYCE @datto.com, then Jason will get that over to you there. No problem at all with that. So I am not, let me just double check from question side of things. I know we got John's answered on that. Otherwise just a ton of people saying great stuff, Frank. They appreciate all the tips that you had on here, and really just doing an update on this to be able to see of kind of where things stand right now from backup. And I know we're going to be hearing a lot more this year from the Kaseya team on the data backup solutions. I'm going to end the poll here right now. Or I'll give it a few seconds just in case you haven't answered it. And then with that, I think we're just about there. You're getting a ton of great presentation, Frank. So that goes to your that can boost up your ego a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. That's the only reason why I do these is for the praise.
And if anybody has gone to the links that I put in, please save it. But you have my email, jprice@datto.com. If you see that there's any value to any of that stuff, I would love to spend more time like getting those things updated. If you're going to see a benefit to it, right? Once again, historically, those tools have been really, really helpful for our partners. And if you send me an email and say, hey, this is good, or hey, this is crap, whatever, let me know, and we can see how we can do better with that for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason's great on all this kind of stuff here, and he loves it. That's why he's got a big grin this whole this whole webinar with it, being able to get back to his roots.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, awesome stuff, guys. Appreciate it. You guys have a good one. We'll
Thanks
see
so
you,
much.
Jason. I'll try to stop by over there.
Awesome.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.